Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be the mid-year book freakout tag. The mid-year book freakout tag was created by Chami, who used to have a channel, Read Like Wildfire. She's still around. I think her channel is just called Chami now. I don't think she makes book content anymore. In any case, I wasn't exactly tagged in this. I was technically tagged in the mid-year check-in tag in the comments of Scott from Book Invasion's video, because I was groaning in his comments because he did this a month ago and I said it's not the middle of the year yet. So he said I should do that one, which I recorded, and it was boring, so I decided I'm going to do this one instead. But this is the one that I did last year and the year before, so I thought I have a bit of a tradition. Anyway, I will link to his video since I was sort of tagged, and this is sort of very similar. So here we go. Question number 1 is, what is the best book that you've read so far this year? And I would say that the best piece of fiction I read this year was Adam Pottle's The Bus, which I talked about in one of my novella wrap-ups. It was, I thought, in a lot of ways, a masterwork. It used 21 separate voices within a really short format, but it really worked and dealt with a piece of history that I think could have been emotionally engaging without being technically interesting, but it managed to be both, and I thought that was really impressive. I think the best piece of nonfiction that I read was Voices from Chernobyl, which is a depressing set of essentially interviews, but without the questions. So it comes off as a group of monologues from people who either live around the area of Chernobyl or were involved in things that happened during the meltdown, and it's just interesting stuff and well worth reading. Question number 2 is the best sequel that you've read so far this year. And it's probably no surprise, I'm going to say that the best sequel that I read this year was Volume 3 of The Wildstorm. This is a comic series written by Warren Ellis and drawn by John Davis Hunt, which is a reinvention of the Wildstorm universe. I talk about this all the time, and I have been reading this in the floppies as well, and still picking up the trades because I love it that much. And I'm not sure what day I'm going to post this. Today or tomorrow the final issue of this is coming out, so I'm hyped for that. Question number 3 is new release that you haven't read yet but want to. I haven't been particularly keeping up with new releases this year, and to be honest, this year I haven't even read the book that I mentioned last year, because last year I bought Brian McClellan's Wrath of Empire the day it came out, and I still haven't read this. And I believe that the 3rd book in that series is coming out this year, so I guess I'm not as interested in following the new releases, but I would like to read that, even though it's a last year's release at this point. Number 4 is your most anticipated new release for the rest of 2018. As I'm filming this, the final issue of The Wildstorm comes out tomorrow, so I'm hyped for that. And if it needs to be a full book and not just a floppy, well, the final volume of that is going to come out in the fall, so yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to. Question number 5 is biggest disappointment. The most disappointing book that I read this year was a collection of poetry called The Scarborough by Michael Listra. It's actually the poetry itself is very interesting. It's a combination of basically references to things like Dante's Inferno mixed with early 1990s Southern Ontario Canadian pop culture references, which would be interesting, but the framing device of it is specific to a specific Easter weekend in 1992, during which a really famous Canadian serial killer couple murdered one of their victims. Because that's used as the framing, but the poetry itself is all very fluffy and pop culture focused, I didn't feel like it earned the gravity that the serial killer situation would have required, so it was really tonally weird. So it was disappointing just because I thought the poetry in any other context would have been really entertaining, and I would have talked about that very enthusiastically, but because it used this serial killer framing device, I felt like it was too glib for what it actually was. Question number 6 is biggest surprise. And I'm going to pick something that isn't a surprise in terms of something that I read and was blown away by. I'm going to pick instead the local shopping mall in my neighborhood has an event for basically every holiday, and hilariously they tend to pick decor that will work for 2 holidays in a row. So like they'll have big red roses for both Valentine's Day and Chinese New Year, and they'll have pink for both Easter and Mother's Day. But anyway, I went to their Eid market thing, and which, you know, is overpriced gifty stuff mostly, but I randomly came across a book signing by S.K. Ali, and one of my, I guess, pretend nieces, my friend's daughter, is a big fan, so I had this signed for her at that event just as a surprise. So that was a fun bookish surprise, even though that's not really what the question's answering, but I thought that was very entertaining. Because, I mean, a signed book, surely that's a better gift than like a $50 prayer pillow. Come on. Question number 7 is your favorite new author. My favorite new author is the author of the book that I mentioned as the best of the year, and that's Adam Pottle. That novella that I mentioned in question 1 was the first thing I had read from him. I then read his poetry collection, Beautiful Mutants. I then went and saw an author event, mostly because he was one of the panelists on it, and I picked up his memoir. And then just last week I saw a play that he had written. So yeah, I would say that he's probably my new favorite author. I don't know that I would call him my new favorite author, but he's definitely an author that I had never read before this year, and now I have read a bunch of his material across media, and I've been really impressed, so. Question 8 is newest fictional crush. And I usually make fun of this question, but I'm going to say instead that I just read The Satipur Moonstone, which, if you watch my last wrap-up, this is the book that was a library book and I have misplaced it and I'm gonna have to end up paying fees on it, so let's continue to hope that I find it. But I'm kind of taken with the way that the main character has a crush on another character, sort of, even though they're both, like, she's a divorced woman and, you know, they're not young children or anything, but it's cute. And I'm kind of charmed by the cuteness of that. Question number 9 is newest favorite character, and kind of similarly with the last question, I don't usually read for characters. I don't really have a favorite fictional character, but since I liked the interaction of those 2 characters that I answered for the last question, I'm gonna go with them. So, Parveen and Colin from that mystery series, because they're, I don't know why I'm so charmed by them, but I'm charmed, so let's go with that. Question number 10 is book that made you cry. And I don't think I've had any crying moments in books this year. I think there were a couple of moments where I thought to myself, why am I not crying at this? There is a chapter in the essay collection, Thick, in which the author describes how her daughter basically died a couple of hours after birth because when she went to seek medical help several days previous, she was basically ignored because of the framework of anti-blackness and anti-fatness from the medical establishment in the United States, and it's the most depressing thing. And I didn't actually cry during it, but I actually thought to myself, why am I not crying during this? Because this is appalling. I should be crying. I was in public and reading that at Service Ontario office, so I'm glad I wasn't crying because I was in public, but I did think, wow, I should be crying about this. It was incredibly depressing. Question number 11 is a book that made you happy. And a book that definitely had me grinning was I listened to the audio version of Haruki Murakami's What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, and I'm a big fan of endurance sports and thinking about endurance sports and the culture around endurance sports, and that book is primarily about his training in the run-up to the 2005 New York City Marathon, and he does poorly in that marathon, and it just some parts of it were hilarious to me just for the running bit. Some parts of it were hilarious to me just because my now ex-husband ran the New York City Marathon within a year, has run it a number of times, but once ran a personal worst in it. And so when Murakami is talking about running his personal worst in it, I was kind of cracking up, in part because of that, and I was outside walking the dog, grinning like a fool as I was listening to this because it was such fun. So. Yeah. Question number 12 is your favorite book to movie adaptation that you saw this year. To be honest, I haven't seen any movies this year. Not at the cinema, not at home, nothing. And I've only watched a couple of TV series and none of them were, well, okay, technically one of them was sort of an adaptation. I watched bits and pieces of Legends of Tomorrow, which had a subplot involving John Constantine that was sort of clearly semi-inspired by a subplot that happened in the James Tynion IV and Ming Doyle run on Hellblazer. So, sort of. So that's the only one that I can even count, even though it's not a film, it's a TV series. I guess that has to be my answer. But yeah, I haven't seen any movies this year. Question number 13 is what is the favorite review or video that you've written or filmed this year? But I enjoyed going through the process of basically talking about my experience at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival and the Festival of Literary Diversity. I'll link to both of those below, although you probably don't want to watch them because people didn't particularly want to watch them. But I think I got more out of the events by talking about it, so even though other people didn't necessarily want to listen to me talk about it, I'm glad I made those videos. So that was fun to share, even if not as many people were interested in what I had to say about that as they would be about other things, maybe. Question number 14 is what is the most beautiful book that you've bought this year? And that's this edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And this is the very famous Edward Fitzgerald artsy translation, which came in this slipcase, but is also a really nice silk cover. I got this secondhand, and I bought this mostly because my mother, who is a very mathy person and spent her whole career either teaching math or doing analysis for businesses, revealed to me recently that when she was in university, she used to sign letters to people with quotes from this, and I thought that was so hilariously out of character for her that I bought her this, and she didn't particularly want it, so I have this now, and it's pretty. Question number 15 is, what books do you need to read by the end of this year? And there are no books that I need to read for the end of this year, but I did agree to co-host a read-along of the Thomas Covenant The Unbeliever series, so I do need to read at least the first 3, possibly the first 6 in that series over the next 6 months, so I guess that's what I need to read. Alright, so that is the final question. I feel like almost everyone has done one of these tags if they've wanted to, but on the off chance that you haven't done this tag and you want to do this tag, please consider yourself tagged. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.